Hello, everybody. Ezri Rozier here. Man, these Philadelphia Eagles. For the first time since 2016, the Philadelphia Eagles are 3-0. For the first time in 6 years, the Philadelphia Eagles have reached the 3-0 mark. So this game last Sunday, it was beautiful. It was beautiful, ladies and gentlemen. It was absolutely fantastic. So I went to this game, and let me tell you, we took over FedEx Field as we usually do. There was like 60% Eagles fans in that stadium. FedEx Field, it was flooded with green. And the chants, the boos for Carson Wentz, it was amazing. The Eagles, we smoked the Washington Commodes 24-8, the Kobe Bryant numbers. And the final score of this game, it really does not do this game any justice because the Eagles were up 24-0 in the fourth quarter. And then we let them get these garbage time points. They got a safety on Boston Scott in the end zone. And then they scored a late touchdown, and Carson Wentz was intercepted on a 2-point conversion. So even though they got that 8 points, it was garbage time. It was garbage time. Like basically how the Eagles were early last season, especially against the Buccaneers and the Raiders, where we would score all these points in the fourth quarter, show up in garbage time. That was Washington on Sunday. I finally got to watch the Eagles win a road game in person. Before Sunday, I was 0-2 going to road games. I saw them lose at Pittsburgh in 2020. The Chase Claypool game where Claypool scored 4 touchdowns. I saw them get dismantled last year in Las Vegas, the game where we let Derek Carr complete 31 of 34 passes. That disaster. But to see us finally win a road game against Carson Wentz no less, the very quarterback who I was rooting for in my first game at Pittsburgh. I was rooting for Carson Wentz 2 years ago. I was screaming, run for your life, get away from TJ Watt. And then last Sunday, here I was at FedEx Field rooting for Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave to just get after this guy, smoke Carson Wentz, crush Carson Wentz. And man, so I'm going to start with the defense. Jonathan Gannon, I have been on record as somebody who is very critical of Jonathan Gannon, especially last year. Between the low blitz rate, last season, the Eagles blitzed the third least of any team. Only the Texans and Raiders blitzed less. Between that, the soft defense, the extremely high completion percentages that we routinely gave up every week, I just was not a fan of Jonathan Gannon last year. And then the season opener this year in Detroit, where we gave up 35 points in a win, where we got ran over by DeAndre Swift and that other running back they have in Detroit, Williams, for over 180 yards. I'm like, here we go again. Here we go again with this defense by Jonathan Gannon. I was concerned about the defense after week 1 in Detroit. We won, but the defense was my biggest concern about this team. And Jonathan Gannon, let's give him credit where credit is due. His defense has really stepped up these last 2 weeks. On Sunday, the Eagles' defense was strong yet again. The defensive line, my main key heading into this game, I wasn't concerned about the offense. It was the defense, particularly the defensive line. My main concern was, would the defensive line get pressure on Carson Wentz? I wanted to see the defensive line really get after Carson Wentz. And they did exactly that. The defensive line did exactly what I had hoped we would do in this game. We sacked Carson Wentz 9 times. 9 times. I think that is the 4th most sacks we've ever had in a game. We were totally all over Carson Wentz. The defensive line, they ate Carson Wentz up. Brandon Graham, who was coming off a torn ACL that he suffered last year in week 2 against the San Francisco 49ers, he turned back the clock on Sunday. He had 2.5 sacks. In fact, one of his sacks, he actually forced a fumble off Carson Wentz, and it was recovered by Javon Hargrave. Brandon Graham looked extremely good, and I had no doubt that Brandon Graham could return to form because Brandon Graham, even though people didn't like him early in his career, people were just fed up with him being taken over Earl Thomas, and he did start out slow. In all due respect to Brandon Graham, his career, it did start out slow, but Brandon Graham is the player we have that got better with age. Brandon Graham was one of those players that became better as he got older. He looked amazing on Sunday. And then Fletcher Cox had a sack too. Fletcher Cox has looked really good this year. A lot of people last year were concerned that it was his final season in Philadelphia because he didn't really look like that same player he once was. I mean, you can't really blame Cox for that. He's gotten older. Like last year, he looked like he was washed. But so far this season, Fletcher Cox is seeing a rebirth. He was in there too. He had a sack. Josh Sweat was in there. Hassan Reddick, he forced another fumble off Carson Wentz, but Wentz recovered that one, unfortunately. But The defensive line, we really got after this man, Carson Wentz. I was extremely impressed. And then the secondary. So Darius Slay, like he locked down Justin Jefferson last week, he pretty much contained Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin didn't show up until late into this game. And then James Bradbury basically eliminated Curtis Samuel. This defense was suffocating. I thought that it was suffocating against Minnesota. It was probably even more suffocating this game. We didn't allow a score until the fourth quarter. In fact, the first points that Washington scored, they were defensive points because Boston Scott, Jalen Hurts handed the ball off to Boston Scott. We were right near the 1 yard line in our own end zone. And then I think, who was the lineman, the Washington line? It might have been Darren Payne. Darren Payne pushed him back for a safety. That was the first points that Washington scored of the day. They scored 2 points. And then they let up another touchdown late in the game, but it was garbage time. The defense, I'm very shocked with Jonathan Gannon. I'm shocked. I did not expect this sturdy defense from Jonathan Gannon. And then let's get to the offense. So Jalen Hurts is an MVP candidate right now. Jalen Hurts is an MVP candidate. Now, the top MVP candidate right now, I would have to say is Lamar Jackson, but Jalen Hurts, he isn't too far behind him. Jalen Hurts is really progressing as a passer. Like the craziest sequence, so right before halftime, it's at the 45-yard line. Jalen Hurts unleashes this absolute just deep strike, this surgical strike to Devonte Smith at the 1 yard line. Devonte Smith, who is very skinny, he jumps up for it playing like he's a big man, and he mosses a Washington defender and comes down with the catch at the 1 yard line. What an amazing throw that was by Jalen Hurts. It was just like that throw he made to Quez Watkins on Monday night against the Vikings the previous week. Jalen Hurts, he's really progressing. Jalen Hurts at this rate, he's going to earn his contract extension because he looks really good right now. Jalen Hurts looks really good. And then Devonte Smith. Devonte Smith was the showstopper in Washington. He finished with 169 total yards, and then he had a touchdown as well right after that play I mentioned where Hurts heaved up the 45-yard pass to Smith at the 1 yard line. I thought that we were going to run out of time because we went no huddle, and then I'm looking at the clock. I'm like, we're not going to have enough time. And then Hurts, he throws that touchdown pass to Devonte Smith to put us up 24-0. Devonte Smith had 156 yards in the first half. In the first half alone. That was the most yardage for an Eagles wide receiver in the first half since Kevin Curtis against the Detroit Lions in 2007. That game where we wore the blue and yellow throwback jerseys. Like Devonte Smith, so many people were talking about Devonte Smith after week 1 where he had no catches in Detroit against the Lions. People were saying, oh man, is A.J. Brown going to mean that Devonte Smith isn't the guy anymore? Is A.J. Brown going to reduce Devonte Smith's importance? And I was like, what are you guys talking about? I mean, it was one game. So what? Like A.J. Brown, he'll have his games, and then Devonte Smith, he'll have his games. Today, Devonte Smith had his, well, not today. Sunday, Devonte Smith had his game. He was eating up Washington's defense all day. Now, there was a play early in the game where he didn't get his feet down inbounds, but Ron Rivera, he very stupidly was slow to challenge that because Washington would have won that challenge because he didn't get his second foot down. But Devonte Smith, needless to say, he was just amazing. He was great. He was the first-round pick. He put on full display why he was a first-round pick, 10th overall in 2021. And then I thought that we ran the ball pretty well too. Miles Sanders, he had 46 yards. It wasn't an amazing day, but I thought that we ran the ball pretty solidly. And then Dallas Goddard actually scored the first touchdown of the day. I believe he left the game with an injury. I got to look more into that because you don't want to lose Dallas Goddard. We missed him, I believe, for the Buccaneers game last season, and I think he would have made a difference in that game. But, man, I'm just so impressed with this team. And to beat up Carson Wentz like this, to just decisively beat Carson Wentz after he gave up on the city, it really felt good. It felt good to see us win a road game. It felt good to watch us win a road game in person after watching 2 losses in these previous 2 years at Pittsburgh, at Las Vegas. This team is special, man. Now, I'm not going to declare any Super Bowl trips. I'm not going to talk about the playoffs yet. I mean, it's too early. It's only week 4 at this point. Week 4 starts tomorrow. Like, it's too early, but this team, we can be something this year. This team can be something special. Like, in the atmosphere of the fans, like, we were booing the crap out of Carson Wentz. Like, we We overran their stadium. I know we usually do that because it's FedEx Field and Philadelphia is very close to Washington, very close to that Maryland area. But this invasion of FedEx Field was different. It was different because it was Carson Wentz we were facing. It was our former franchise quarterback. And the amount of energy, the amount of passion, the electricity in that stadium among the Eagles fans, it was just amazing. It was spectacular. Every time Carson Wentz took the field, man, the jeers, the boos, it was like we were really getting into his head. Carson Wentz, I used to love Carson Wentz. I used to defend Carson Wentz every week. Back in the 2020 season, I didn't think that season was fully entirely his fault. I thought that because we had a bad offensive line, I thought Doug Peterson wasn't calling plays very well because we weren't running the ball. We weren't trying to take pressure off Carson Wentz, who was obviously struggling. But Carson Wentz, I'm glad we moved on from him. At first, I was angry when we traded him to the Indianapolis Colts, but we made the right decision. Carson Wentz will not throw the ball away. He holds on to the ball way too long. We saw it yet again. On Sunday was yet another display of Carson Wentz holding on to the ball too long. He holds on to the ball, trying to play hero ball. Brandon Graham forces a fumble. Javon Hargrave recovers it. That sets the Eagles up for a touchdown by Dallas Goddard. And then he fumbles again after being hit by Hassan Reddick. He's lucky to recover that fumble, but so many times that game I was looking at him, I'm like, look, there this guy is again. Here is this guy, Carson Wentz, holding on to the ball too long. And like Washington, I just don't understand their play calling in this game on Sunday. So Carson Wentz was obviously having problems early in this game. He was struggling. And they were actually running the ball decently well. Antonio Gibson, he was running the ball very well on us. I thought that Washington, they were pounding us with the ground game, but they got away from it when it was working to put the game on Wentz to pass more, even though they knew that he was struggling. They knew that Carson Wentz was not in a good rhythm, and they kept making him pass the ball. They would not run the ball with Antonio Gibson as much as they should have. It was just bad play calling. And then I watched Carson Wentz's post-game press conference. It sounded just like his post-game press conferences back with us. It sounded just like the press conferences we always used to hear in Philly. I've got to be better. I got to learn to throw the ball away. Dude, this is your freaking, seventh year? This is your 7th year? Why are you still saying I've got to be better? Why are you still saying I've got to throw the ball away? You should know to do both of those things by this point. This is your 7th year. This is your 7th year, Carson Wentz, and you still are holding on to the ball too long. You're still fumbling. The fumbles have been an issue ever since he came into the league since 2016. The fumbles were Carson Wentz. I knew he was going to cough it up. I said it in the pregame. I said it in my pregame preview. Carson Wentz, he will cough up the ball. Carson Wentz is a turnover waiting to happen. Carson Wentz, I knew that he was going to give us the ball. I knew it because Carson Wentz, he does not have good ball security. His pocket awareness is trash. It's trash. This game Carson Wentz just played on Sunday, it looked like a 2020 Carson Wentz game. Fumbles, holding on to the ball holding on to the ball too long. And then poorly thrown passes. Like there was this one pass, the Washington player, I think it was either McLaurin or Samuel. They were wide open on the sideline. Then Carson Wentz threw it at their feet. He threw it at their feet. That was wide open. And Carson Wentz, it's just, what happened to you, man? You were once so proud. You once had the brightest future, one of the brightest futures in the league. And then you've turned into this. You've turned into this guy. I'm glad you're not our problem anymore because if you were still in Philadelphia watching that press conference, hearing you say, oh, I've got to get rid of the ball. I've got to be better. 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 I am so sick of hearing that. I was so sick of hearing that with Carson Wentz at the tail end of the 2020 season. I'm like, how many times is this guy going to say, I've got to be better. I've got to throw the ball away. Just do it, man. Don't say it. Do it. Do it. But fortunately, we're actually the beneficiaries of Carson Wentz's misfortunes this time. We were the benefiting party when it came to Carson Wentz and his flaws. And I love this team. I love this team. And then A.J. Brown and Devonte Smith whipping out Batman capes after they scored their touchdowns. That reminds me, I forgot to mention, A.J. Brown had a touchdown earlier in this game to put us up 17-0. like this game, it was beautiful. It was like I couldn't ask for a better game. Beating up our former franchise quarterback Carson Wentz, who quit on the city, winning decisively. This was our first game against the Washington Commodes. The first game we ever had against the Washington Commodes. In their house, we blew them out. We put the Washington Commodes under 500. We gave them a losing record because they won their first game of the season against the Jaguars. They lost last week to the Detroit Lions, and then they lost this game against the Eagles on Sunday. We put the Commodes under 500 for the first time ever. The first team to give the Washington Commodes a losing record. I love that. I love it. And man, so there was some things that I didn't like about this game too. So a lot of people have been pointing out for the second week in a row, the Eagles did not score in the second half. Now, personally, I do think that it was because we were dominating the game so much. We were up 24-0. I believe if the game was going differently, I believe if the game was maybe 17-7 or 14-0, I think the Eagles would have scored in the second half. I think that the complexion of that game would have been different had our margin of leading the game been smaller. Had we been leading by a lesser margin, I think that we would have been more aggressive in the second half. But I will say that that is something we do have to work on because we can't go not scoring in the second half all year because you're not going to get away with that against certain teams. Like teams like the Green Bay Packers who we face in Week 12, the teams like the Tennessee Titans who we face after that. Although the Titans haven't looked that great this year. They did pick up their first win against the Raiders on Sunday. But I don't think you're going to be able to get away with that not scoring in the second half, Jazz, against certain other teams, because we got to pick that up. We do got to improve on that. We do have to score points in the second half. This was a problem in Detroit, too. Although that game, we did score in the second half, I believe, a field goal. But Washington and the Vikings last week, we did not score. I'd like to see that get improved on. It wasn't a big deal this time because, like I said earlier, we were just destroying the game. We were leading by a massive margin, 24-0. The complexion of the second half would have been different if that lead wasn't so large. I firmly believe that. And then the other thing I want to talk about, Nick Sirianni, there was one play call in this game I didn't like. It was a 4th and 1 play. I liked the choice to go for it on 4th and 1. I didn't want us to kick the field goal. But we gave it to Zach Pascal on an end around. I didn't like that call. I didn't like you have all these running backs. You have Miles Sanders, you have Boston Scott, you have Kenneth Gainwell. On a 4th and 1, you're going to give it to Zach Pascal on an end around? Like, what? Like, I mean, I would have rather kicked the field goal than that play. I mean, I like the decision to go for it on 4th down, but you got to think of a better play than that. Like, no disrespect to Zach Pascal. I thought he played a big role in this game too. Hauled in a few big catches. But to give it to him on a 4th and 1 end around, that was you got a little too cute there, Nick Sirianni. A little too cute there. But it didn't really bite us that much in the end because we still won the game lopsidedly. We still destroyed the Washington Commodes decisively. And then next week, we have a familiar face returning to Lincoln Financial Field. Doug Peterson, the head coach who won the Philadelphia Eagles their only Super Bowl in franchise history. Doug Peterson, he's going to be motivated to win this game because we did fire Doug Peterson back in January 2021. And personally, I didn't think that Doug Peterson deserved to get fired. I did not want Doug Peterson to get fired. I was very saddened when that happened. I thought that Doug Peterson, he deserved another year because you had a coach who had a record of 4-2 in the playoffs, including a Super Bowl win, took you to the playoffs for 3 consecutive seasons, and then you fire him after one uncharacteristically bad year. I didn't like that. I did not agree with that decision to let go of Doug Peterson. So I believe that that's going to be in the back of his head heading into this game at Lincoln Financial Field, his old stomping grounds. And Doug Peterson, he actually thinks that he's going to get booed in this game. Why would anybody boo Doug Peterson? The man brought Philadelphia its only Super Bowl. The man is a Super Bowl winning head coach. Why would you boo him? Why would you boo the man who brought the Eagles their proudest moment in franchise history? Why would you boo him? Doug Peterson, he's going to get a standing ovation when he locks on to Lincoln Financial Field. He better get a standing ovation because if I see any Eagles fans booing Doug Peterson, I'm going to flip out. I'm going to be like, what are you doing? Are you dumb? Are you high? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, boo Doug Peterson. Who would boo Doug Peterson? Like, seriously. But take care, everybody. We'll talk about this Jaguars game later in the week. I believe that's going to be a tough game because They actually just came off of a drubbing of the Los Angeles Chargers, 38-10 at SoFi Stadium. The Jaguars just blew out the Chargers. Now, Justin Herbert, he did have injured ribs from that Kansas City game last Thursday, and they were missing some of their players, but the Jaguars, who would expect the Jaguars to go into LA and destroy the Chargers 38-10? That was not the upset I was expecting at all. I thought there'd be upsets, but I didn't think that would be one of them. So take care, everybody, and go Birds.